Hi, Paul here from Photogenius. Now in this video I'm going to show you just how easy it is to change the shutter speed, aperture and ISO on your Canon camera. Now to get the most from a camera like this, you really want to get out of the auto mode and start using the camera manually, because in auto your camera is doing all the work for you. It's making all the key decisions, and the result you get of course may be good, but sometimes it can be quite frustrating because the camera isn't really recording what we would like to record, and you don't get any chance to be creative as well in the auto modes. So what I'm going to do today is talk about how you can be more creative with your camera by using the manual mode. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is get this camera in the manual mode. There's a round dial on the top of the camera. I'm going to turn it round so the letter M lines up with the little white marker. This camera is now in manual. This means that I can now tell the camera what to do. Basically, I'm able to control the shutter speed, the camera's aperture, and the ISO, and this is a big step up from shooting in auto, because now I also get to be more creative with the camera. So I'm going to talk you through the key functions, starting with the shutter. Now let's begin by looking at the shutter. Think of it like a little door. It sits behind the lens. At the moment it's closed, and that means that no light can get into this camera. But of course we need to let light into the camera, otherwise we can't take a picture. And we do that by pressing the shutter button on the top of the camera. So if I do that now, you'll hear a click. In fact, you'll hear two little clicks, and that's the sound of the shutter opening and then closing. So the shutter, the role of the shutter is to let light into the camera. It opens and then it closes. What we can do, and this is how we use it to control light, is we can dictate how long the shutter is open for. We can use fast shutter speeds in bright light, and this will also freeze movement. So we can use faster shutter speeds if maybe we're doing sports photography or maybe taking pictures of animals or pets. But at the same time, we can also slow the shutter down. So when the light isn't as good, maybe you're taking a photo in the evening, you can open the shutter longer. This will allow you to gather more light, but it will also affect your image in a different way, and that is movement. Slow shutter speeds we can use to blur and emphasize movement. This might be a waterfall, for example. Fast shutter speeds freeze movement. And to adjust the shutter, this is the easiest one of all. All you need to do is turn the control dial on the top of the camera. You'll see the number on the back of the camera changing, and this is the shutter speed. On this particular Canon, the fastest shutter speed is 1/4000th of a second. The slowest shutter speed is 30 seconds. Now let's take a look at the aperture. Now the aperture is built into the lens, so it actually has nothing to do with the camera you're using, but everything to do with the lens you're using. And the aperture is basically a hole built into the lens that you can adjust. Open the hole up, make it wider, and we allow more light down the lens. Make the hole smaller and we get less light down the lens. So think of the aperture as a way of controlling the flow of light through the lens. Now, to see the position of the aperture in the lens at present, we look at the screen on the back of the camera and you will notice a number with an F in front of it. Now this number represents the position of the aperture, and the numbers are a bit confusing because they kind of work backwards. A bigger F number is a smaller aperture, but a smaller F number is a larger aperture. And to control it on a Canon camera is very easy. You hold down the AV button on the back of the camera, and just like with the shutter speed, you then turn the control dial on the top of the camera. So hold down AV, turn the control dial. The F number on the back of the camera will adjust. Now aperture affects light, but also affects depth of field, which is basically about sharpness, not so much of your subject, but what's in the foreground in front of your subject and what's behind your subject. I've made a separate video about controlling depth of field. I'll put a link to it up here. And finally, let's look at ISO. Now ISO relates to the sensor inside your camera. Years ago we put film in cameras, now we have a digital sensor inside the camera. It's doing the same job as the film, it's there to record light. So when the shutter opens, light enters the camera, falls on the sensor, and your camera starts to record light. Shutter closes, and then we get to see the results on the back of the camera. Now, by adjusting the ISO, you can make your sensor more or less sensitive to light. If you increase the ISO, your sensor becomes more sensitive to light, and this will make your picture brighter. But if you reduce the ISO, your sensor becomes less sensitive to light and your picture will be darker. Now be careful with ISO, because there is a downside to using it. If you increase the ISO too high, your picture will look a bit grainy and soft. This is called digital noise. So what I tend to say is keep the ISO nice and low, and around 200 is, I think, ideal for most situations. Now, to change the ISO on your Canon camera is usually very easy, because Canon give us an ISO button. On this camera, it's on the back. It's clearly marked ISO. If I press it and once again turn the control dial on the top of the camera, I get to adjust the ISO. On some of the bigger Canon cameras, the ISO button is on the top. Very simple. So just to summarize, you now know how to change the shutter, aperture and ISO on your Canon camera, and this will allow you to be more creative with your photography. To change the shutter speed, all you do is turn the wheel, aperture, AV, turn the wheel, ISO, ISO button, turn the wheel. The key here though is to get the balance right between the two. So maybe to start things off, I suggest a low ISO, maybe 200, a wide aperture, maybe f3.5, 5.6, something around there, and then play around with the shutter speed. If you're shooting on a bright day, you'll be able to use a faster shutter speed. If you're shooting maybe indoors or later in the evening, you can use a slower shutter speed. Have fun playing with your camera, and you'll quickly see that you can be more creative and get better results than just staying in auto. So I hope you've enjoyed this short video showing you how to get better results from your Canon DSLR camera. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to this channel. New videos come in every single week. I'll see you next time. See ya.